Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm going to review Deathlok the Demolisher by Charles Houston and Lan Bedina. This is from the Marvel Knights line, and there is a parental advisory, and I concur. Now, I've been a fan of the Deathlok character since the 70s, and I realized as I was thinking about making this video that I was more enamored of the character than the storyline, because I gotta tell you the truth, I don't remember many of the storylines from the 70s. I can remember vaguely him taking on some gangs in one issue, where he ended up lugging around a laser rifle that was out of charge when he finally needed it, and his computer telling him this finally didn't think it was worthy of telling him that, by the way, the big heavy laser rifle you're lugging around is useless. I loved the idea of the reborn character. I liked Cyborg from DC Comics. Frederick Pohl's Man Plus is one of my favorite science fiction novels. If you ever get a chance to read it, do so. The main character is a full conversion cyborg. The idea of an actual physical redemption from death. How it's always fascinating. I always liked the character of Frankenstein for that reason, the monster, the creation. I think playing a Frankenstein monster style Golem would be quite fun to do in a role-playing game. I picked this up, I don't remember how long ago. I think I put it in one of my bargain videos as I bought it at a discount. But I finally got around to reading it a couple weeks ago. And I just had an opportunity to sit down and turn through it. And the artwork in the book is really quite attractive. I'll give you an example of this. Here we go. I love that almost realistic style of art. I really happen to enjoy that. That's the kind of artwork I really get into. I think that it is my favorite style. It almost looks like it could step off the page. So we have this particular iteration of the character is a little different from what I do. This takes place in the future. Most of the Marvel stories in the past were contemporary to the Marvel Universe. This takes place just directly in the future. And the main character's name in this one is Mike Travers. Now, Mike Travers is an elite athlete in the sport of war. War has become a spectator sport. It is literally on primetime television with commentators. One of the commentators himself is a cyborg. Nations do battle on camera with teams of mercenaries and military service personnel for the entertainment of the masses. And Mike Travers is one of the most elite members of that sport, that activity. He is a billion-dollar franchise. He has all kinds of ads he does, and it showed us a montage of all the different products he was pushing. And he makes good money at it. He's young, and he's fabulous, and he's shallow as a rain puddle. He is contemptible. He is nothing but the face of death and destruction, and yet he smiles at the camera and makes a buck off of it and walks away without a conscience. Until eventually he grows no longer necessary. And then someone blows him up. Intentionally. But they fail. They don't blow him up completely, and part of him survives. And the teams that are designed to this kind of thing start to take advantage of that situation. But part of his brain is damaged, so they were able to salvage that from another person who is a far more staid, stoic, and trained military personnel. A guy who is the soldier's soldier kind of thing. So they put these two characters together. Now, in the original comic, there was the character of Deathlok had a computer wired into his brain and he would talk to on a regular basis. And now Mike Travers has this secondary voice, his character, I don't remember the name of him from this particular comic. And they debut this character in the television show. He's a big hit. He's destructive as all get out, violent, destroys things, and he is the absolute quintessential perfection of death on two legs. He is the best there is that has ever been at this game. One small problem. He decides to step outside the parameters they've created. That's not a shock. That's not a storyline that anyone didn't see coming. RoboCop is a fine example from the original first two films. The third one was not great. I enjoyed the first two, however. And the new one looks like it'd be a fun action film. I have no idea if it's going to actually adhere to the storyline enough to be considered a true RoboCop descendant, however. And as he begins to diverge, he begins to realize that the underbelly of the American nation has been gutted. That there are the haves, the tiny little middle class in the middle, and then there's the masses that live in poverty and squalor and desperation. And he ends up becoming a champion for them and helping them to carve out a part of the nation for themselves that is theirs. He essentially makes the Occupy Wall Street idea a reality because he's the biggest and the baddest there is, and to go in and take him out would be such an affront even for the people who do this that they can't do it. They're not willing to actually nuke their own territory to take out American citizens who are just trying to occupy American territory and, survive. So you end up with this character who's now leading this revolution in this one zone, becomes an area of freedom. So yes, it's a story of redemption, so I quite enjoy it. But something about it was bugging me. In the back of my brain, it's like something about this is it's pushing a button. I don't know what that button is, but I knew eventually I would think of it. That's how my subconscious works. It turns on things frequently while I'm dreaming. It turns on things. But in this particular case, it finally came through when I was at work a week later. I'm at work and I'm like, I knew that when it would hit me, I'd be like, duh. And when it finally hit me, it was like, duh. Pinocchio. Deathlok wants to be a real boy. He wants to be a full-fledged human being. And along with the conscience they built into him with this officer, he becomes one. He finally achieves humanity after having been stripped of almost everything on him that is human. So, it's very violent, beautifully drawn. The storyline I felt was quite enjoyable. It was a little bit talky. There were in sections in there that I think we could have done without this section right here. They could have tightened it up a little, you know what I mean? I think you could have had as many pages and it had as an interesting story, but I think there should have been a little bit less dialogue. This type of storyline with a character this active and this interesting, I think, really needs to be a little more action-driven, a little less contemplative outside of the character. The character needs to be contemplative. But there was a little more exposition that I thought was absolutely necessary, you know what I mean? But overall, I definitely enjoyed this book. I highly recommend it. I love the character. I've always loved the character. I'm going to put a link to the Wikipedia link to Deathlok's character so you can get a little background. I don't know if you want. And his artwork is great. And I've actually used the character of Deathlok. Not I didn't call him Deathlok, but I used the character himself in a Gamma World campaign as a survivor of the apocalypse. That he made it through, and he'd been surviving on his own for hundreds of years, or wanting to be left alone, until of course the characters come along and kind of trying to convince him to go out and actually become a useful and functional member of society. Again, redemption stories. I'm a sucker for them. So, go forth. Get yourself a copy of Deathlok the Demolisher, or if you prefer to think of him as Deathlok the Destroyer, it's the name I still think of in my head. Because I really enjoyed it. I had a good time. It was very pleasant to revisit that character. I don't know, can you see him? I don't know if you can see him. Oh, but right over there in the corner, there is, just to the side of the snowman, there's a Deathlok the Destroyer statuette. And I've done a review of that particular figure, and he's the only statuette I have, a bust of a character I own, and it's Deathlok the Destroyer, because he is a character from my past, and I'm glad to see that they've finally moved him forward and still made him a relevant character in the present.